All right, welcome everyone to the March edition of the 2022 A20 Sustainability Series. This is a series that we do monthly for the first 5 months or so of every year. And so far we have covered electrification and how to get a pathway to kicking fossil fuels in your home or business. We covered sustainable food and food access, and we discussed what we eat and how we get it. Next month, we will be looking at air quality monitoring and why it matters in Ann Arbor. But tonight, we are talking about the circular economy of soil. So we'll be examining the environmental impacts of things on soil, from plants and back to soil again. And we have a really exciting panel for you tonight. And I'm excited to see what we can uncover. So thank you for joining us tonight. This will be recorded. You are welcome to submit questions via the Q&A at any time throughout the presentations. We'll go through the panel presentations and then jump into Q&A at the end. But you, like I said, are welcome to submit your questions at any time. If we see any that are appear to be clarifying, we'll go ahead and jump into that question earlier. But I would like to give you a brief introduction to the three of our panelists. We have Lisa Perschke, who is with the Hamburg Township. We have Joet Reoma, who is with a number of different qualifications, and we'll read through those when it comes time. And then David Benjamin is also joining us. And so we're really excited to have these three here and for you to learn the wealth of knowledge that they have. When it comes to soil health, a lot of that is heavily impacted by wetlands. And so we'll hear a lot of discussion tonight about wetlands and their role in maintaining soil health and how that impacts humans, us, and why it's important. So without further ado, I say, let's just jump right on into it. And we'll start here with Lisa Perschke, who grew up in Northwest Indiana, so she's also a local. She is the planning and zoning coordinator for Hamburg Township, where she has been employed since November of 21. So prior to that, Lisa was employed with a nonprofit organization, Recycle Ann Arbor, and as a recycling program coordinator for 15 years. She got her bachelor's degree in public affairs from IU and is currently working towards her master's degree in public administration at EMU. Lisa loves learning about microbes and their importance to the well-being of our soil and our bodies through her elective classes. In her downtime, Lisa can be found voluntarily serving her community. She serves on the board of the Genesis of Ann Arbor and as the vice president, and Hope Lake Parks Association as the treasurer. Lisa provides hundreds of hours teaching and providing outreach as an advanced master composter, an advanced master gardener, a master citizen planner, and a Lake and Stream Leadership Institute certified educator with the MSU Extension. She strives to teach everyone she meets about sustainability, showing them the ways they can individually make a difference. Lisa's very passionate about backyard composting, gardening, and increasing the biodiversity of microbes in her soil. She loves sharing her newfound knowledge of the incredible world of microbes and their health benefits in reducing disease through healthy eating. She loves making her own kombucha and sourdough bread at home. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Lisa, and the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, let me try this again. Oh, it works. Okay. So let me start up my presentation. You let me know if it doesn't work. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, so we'll click on that. It says I'm sharing. Okay, now let's do
You
that.
are.
Now am I?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So tonight we're going to talk about soil and water, a sustainable mix. The topics I'll cover tonight will be, what is a wetland? Why are wetlands so important to our health and the health of the native species in Michigan around us? We'll talk about transitional zones and why they are impacting aquatic species, making them endangered and extinct, as well as picking the right plant for the right location and making sure that whatever vegetation that we're planting in these different zones are going to be acclimated to the environment that we put them in. I'm gonna play you guys a YouTube video of a rain simulator. It's a couple minutes, and it's gonna show the importance of soil management. Even though the soil type is exactly the same, it depends on how we manage this resource and how it impacts the water resource we have everywhere here in Michigan. Also composting and how important that is to the microbial life within the soil, within the plants, and then in turn in us, because we eat plants. And then learning from nature's systems, which are healthy, and when we ignore those and don't respect them, we get into some major trouble. So we'll touch base on a few of those issues. So what are wetlands? Well, everyone knows that they're saturated patches of land with water. And depending on the type of flora and fauna found within each realm of wetland, there are many different types. That's how they're ID'd. And as well as their elevation in the aquatic environment. So I'm not going to read this. This will be available for you guys to go through, but there are different kinds of wetlands. Well, the major importance of them are they act as a buffer. This is very important. A lot of times people want to just come in and develop everything, fill it in, get rid of the wetland. But what they don't understand is they give us so much vital resources that we don't have to pay for. They absorb wave action energy. Coastal communities through adaptive planning are actually finding that this is very important. They're actually trying to mimic, they call it natural based resources. Wetlands actually reduce turbidity, where it stirs up the sediments in the floor of the lake and causes problems. It actually sucks the oxygen out of the bodies of water, whether it's a lake, a stream, or a river, as well as slowing erosion. It holds things in place, those particles that would naturally just run to the lowest water body. It infiltrates the water and slowly releases it, and it creates a habitat for all kinds of aquatic species and plants. It produces shade as well as food. And one of the most important things is it improves water quality. It breaks down nutrients that would naturally just run to the water, like nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as breaks down toxins. And we here in Michigan, we all hear all that pure Michigan information about the resource and tourism that's available to here, our Michiganders, because we have water in wetlands. So it's very important that we remember that when we're developing the land. And so wetland zones exist, and they flow from upland where your house or your commercial buildings are located, and that's usually where trees are found. And then it gradually subsides lower and lower until it gets to the water's edge and into the water. So it's really important that when we're figuring out what we're going to plant near our homes, that we plant the right tree or the right shrubs, making sure that we keep in mind how big that plant's going to be when it becomes mature. Because a lot of times people look at that little tiny seedling and go, oh, that guy, I put about 5 or 10 of them right here. They don't realize that one day they're going to be a 40-foot tree. And that's why a lot of times you see a lot of these mature trees having to be lapidated by because they're up on an electric power line or a telephone pole, and they really need to be managed well, because you're affecting the species, because they're stressing it by cutting it. So it's very important to understand too that if a plant is in a native environment, an ecosystem, it's there for a reason. A lot of times people remove the natives that are found, on their lake shore and the shoreline, and they will actually, find an exotic from Europe somewhere, and they think it's so pretty and they put it there and it becomes invasive. And that's because they took it out of its natural environment. And there's no pests or diseases to keep it in control. And it becomes a nuisance, basically. So we have to always remember, come back to nature, because nature knows what it's, there for. It has its, little niche in what it's supposed to do. So here's a transitional zone. It kind of shows you everything from the terrestrial upland to the water's edge. And it's really important that we remember that, there's a purpose here with the sloping of how the glaciers formed our wetlands and the topography that we have here in Michigan. Last week, I watched a video, I think it was, on how green infrastructure versus hard structures, the seawalls that people have put along the shoreline in Michigan, has actually caused havoc in reducing the number of species. They are estimating that 70% of our native birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians are actually becoming threatened because we're putting a barrier right in the middle of their home. These species need this transitional area between the upland and the water to reproduce, to live, and that's where they find their food. And so we have to remember that, this is the green structure here is natural. I mean, it's native, it belongs here. It's the way we found it, and it should be the way that we leave it. It's just making sure that, nature has a way of buffering itself, of holding the soil and keeping it clean. I mean, the water out of the soil, out of the water, sorry. Okay, so the brain simulation demonstration I'm going to play you will show how different management styles on the same type of soil impact the way that the water runs off the surface, carrying with it sediment, and that in turn will actually add nitrogen and phosphorus to those water, causing algae blooms and other things, as well as how it infiltrates through the different levels of soil. And that's where we really want to get the most bang for our soil buck, is infiltrating it into basically our water reserve in the ground. We call that groundwater. So let me share this with you guys too. And I don't know how to do this. Share screen up. Maybe you can walk me through this. Can you see this?
What we'll do today is either
Probably not.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay, thanks. So when I click on, should I pause maybe the presentation? Is that the problem?
You might have to just stop your screen share altogether and start a new one. Maybe try that.
Darn it. Okay, stop. Did that stop it?
It's already not sharing actually, so
Okay.
well, so when you click on screen share and then share sound, and then you select, there you go.
And now you see it?
Yeah, great.
rainfall simulator to talk about water movement into soil. So in these 4 pans, we have the same soil type, just in different managements. In the pans, we have mower plow, CRP, recently converted CRP to cropland, and 15 years of no-till. So what we'll see is how water moves across the surface in these front bins and how water moves through the soil in the bins behind it. As you can see, this is simulating a pounding rain on some of these different soil management systems. So you can see on the mower plow pan, that soil is running off the surface and it's actually quite muddy in that first jug. Underneath, there's very little water that's moving through that soil deeper into the soil profile. On the CRP, you can see that the water running off of the surface is quite clear, and a lot of that water is infiltrating through that soil, which would recharge deeper in the soil profile. In the recently converted CRP, some of that disturbance is leading to a little bit of runoff, but then also water moving through that soil and still infiltrating. On the last pan, we have wheat on a 15-year no-till soil. And you can see that the water that is running off is very clear, but most of the water is actually moving through that soil and infiltrating deeper into the soil profile. After 1 inch of water in this demonstration, you can see how the water either moves across the surface or down through the soil profile. You can catch this demonstration on the NDSU.
Okay, so let me stop sharing that, right? Okay, take this off. Okay, and go back to this hopefully. Can you see the slides again or no?
Not yet. I think it's coming.
Let's do that. And then place this over here. Can never be easy, can it?
No, of course not.
Okay, try it again. No, it's still not letting me share. Is it in your settings that I'm waiting for, maybe? It's still saying that advanced sharing options, only the host can share.
Well, I haven't changed any of the settings. And it appears that you are still have the permissions.
Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. Now let me go here. Try this again. And hit this. And hit share. Nope, it won't let me. Okay, let me try this now. It showed me, or it let me show you the, no, it's still not, it's doing it again where it's blocking me.
Well, let's see, I'm going to remove your permissions and then
How did that work? Host disable participant screen sharing. Okay.
Okay, so now I have upgraded you again.
Okay, still says I can't. Okay.
Well,
This is fun.
Try going out of the application completely and logging back in.
Out of Zoom?
Yeah. Well, no, don't log out of Zoom, but log out of the application you're using to present.
I did, yeah. Let me do it
Oh,
again.
okay.
Okay. Let's see now, can I share? No.
interesting. It didn't give us any issues during the practice round.
Nope. But I didn't switch from YouTube
Oh.
to,
Yeah, I wonder why it's.
Yeah. Zach, do you have her presentation?
No, I don't think that I do actually. That's a good idea.
share. You cannot modify advanced share.
Well, sorry about this.
Lisa, how did you do it in the first place?
When I click on screen sharing, it shows that I can share when it allows me to. It's still saying that you cannot modify the advanced sharing options as these are locked by your administrator.
Try, so don't click on the little up arrow by the share screen. Click
Okay.
on the icon itself. And you should get
That's it. Okay.
yeah, I don't even have those permissions. That's locked by.
Now, can you guys see this, that I'm picking this up?
Yeah.
You can see
Awesome.
your file explorer, but not the presentation.
There we go. How's that? Can you see it now?
I think it's loading.
It's trying.
It says it's paused. Can you see it now?
No, it's
Not yet.
it's like blacked out for some reason.
Can you see it now?
No,
Okay.
now we see your file explorer.
Did you double click on it?
Can you see it now?
We still see the list.
You still see the list. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. So it's this one. How about now?
There it
Yeah.
is.
Yep.
You
Great.
see it? Okay. All right. So because of the different, all the soils that you saw in that rain simulator were the same, but it was just the management of each one that was different. And she said that there was the mold board plow, which is the normal plowing tractor style that they use to cut wheat and other stuff. There's the CRP, which is Conservation Resource Program plowed. And that was the second one. Then there was recently converted. And then the 15-year no-till was the last one. And it was the 2 and 4 that were the best. You could actually see the water in the back. That's water filtrating through the different soil profiles. And the 2 that were in the front that were the fullest, you could see the sediment that ran right off. That would end up in a lake or in a stream in a water body, increasing the nitrogen loading to the water. And that's one thing we don't want to do. The other thing that we don't want to do to our soil is add chemical fertilizer. MSG drives me crazy when they talk about, fertilizers, but those things are so heavy in salts and chemicals that they really offend the microorganisms that actually live in the soil. These are the reasons why you have trees and plants, and that there's a relationship, a symbiotic relationship going on between the plants and these little almost invisible microorganisms, whether it's bacteria, fungi, nematodes are part of that, as well as micro and macro invertebrates. And these things actually work at the root zone of plants as well as on the plants to actually help them. And there's these white filaments that you see in this slide here called mycelium that actually interconnect root zones of different species within an ecosystem. And it is the coolest thing I ever saw. But the big thing is that we really need to make sure that organics are fed to these microbes, because they are the foundation of good food, good soil. There's this massive food web. And whenever you put deadly heavy salts and chemicals on these guys, they actually will dry up and die. And they will actually flee away from the actual soil that they're put on, because they don't want that, So understanding that these microorganisms are part of this ecosystem, whether it's a forest or a wetland, is so important, or even a garden or a farm. Because when you see a canopy, a tree canopy and its branches, that's reflective of what's below the soil. And there is these miles long fungi that actually take the leaves. And that's really important too, is the leaves that fall from the tree in the fall are food matter for the microbes, for the tree. And it's so important that we grind those up and make them, as small as possible, so they can actually become nutrients that, the fungi break down, and they can act as a conveyor belt, taking and transferring these minerals and nutrients to the root zone below, because it's so far down, and feed all these microbes that actually bring up mushrooms and help feed these micro and macro invertebrate. And looking at how vibrant, healthy vegetation and trees are, knowing that native plants that have been here for millions of years, they talk about when the glaciers formed and formed the lakes and the bodies of water here. These plants were here and they're 30 feet long, and now we've got people, taking them away and putting in Kentucky bluegrass that are only like inches long. And these actually hold and stabilize this wet soil in wetlands, as well in trees and forests. And they're intelligent. They're actually able to communicate and have an interaction between one another. So it's so important that we understand the natural system that exists. And like I said, it's called a nature-based solution, which is funny because as we advance and we think we're so sophisticated and we think that we're, so much smarter than our ancestors were, we end up having to revert back to the natural system. I'm doing some resiliency adaptive planning right now for my class in planning and zoning, and they're talking about installing oyster beds that have always been there for hundreds of years, and bringing back this thing called a levee, it's actually a formation of how waves have actually naturally created these reef barriers that are out in the East Coast. What it is with the action of the soil, of the waves, they actually move soil, the sands in there, so that they can actually help buffer the inland coastal communities. And so, it's so funny how we do this, but it's really important that we understand our natural systems. Know that the plants that we are bringing in, that they actually are supposed to be within these zones that we have. And the other thing is that at the root zone, there are microorganisms that actually create, like I said, a symbiotic relationship with the plants. Plants produce these sugars called exudates that actually attract these microorganisms to the root zone, and they can communicate to other plants within the realm, telling them that there's a disease or a pest that's bothering them. And they can actually communicate to the point where the stomas on other plants will actually close, so that that disease or that pest will not advance to them. And so I learned that through this book called The Hidden Life of Trees, where Peter talks about how important this vast forest is, that he's seen how they interrelate with one another through rhizomial bacterium and mycelium. There's a network that actually exists in the ground, as well as they actually make sounds. There's been research to show that they can communicate. So through their biodiversity, through microbes, that impacts our microbiome gut biome. So when we have an imbalance of microbial communities in our gut, we call this dysbiosis, and that causes all kinds of weird and deadly diseases that can actually kill us, as well as a gene regulation, which some food and medication can actually turn on and turn off the genes that actually control our DNA, as well as autoimmune diseases. So it's really important that we understand that when we take care of the microbes in the soil and that have an interrelationship with those species of plants that we eat, that actually we in turn internalize in our gut. And so when we do ignore these systems, then the problems result. In 2014, the blue algae, I say blue-green algae in the Ohio River was so toxic that people couldn't drink the water in Toledo for, it was, I think, almost 3 weeks, and they finally had to bring in water. And that was caused because of nitrogen loading coming into Lake Erie from Michigan and Ohio. And then the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is from the Midwest, all of the different nitrogen loading from farms and other things going on inside the cities. And it's just coming down through the Mississippi River. And so again, we don't pay attention to what we're doing with our soil. It comes to bite us and then plagues our water resources. And then again, talking about the hard surfaces on our inland shorelines in Michigan, we're actually depleting and endangering our native species. So in conclusion, where the land meets the water, it's an amazing area full of life, with many plants, animals, and fish that spend all or part of their lives near the lake. How the shoreland, as well between the upland terrestrial, the wetland and its many forms, and the water body are managed will determine the health of the water, the soil, as well as the animals and plants that depend on these resources of land, water, and soil. So if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to hang out and answer them after everybody's presentation if you'd like. And let's see, can I end this? Stop share. Okay. Can you see I'm done?
You're all set. Yeah, good work. Hey, look, we brought you here for your expertise on soils and soil systems, not for your technology expertise. Nobody here is expected to have that, so don't even sweat it. And thank you so much for that presentation. A lot of really rich information in there. And I am excited to see what kind of conversations come out of this Q&A at the end here, especially in regards to some of these resources that you've presented on in terms of the intelligence of fungi and the complex relationships between the microorganisms and the root systems. Really fascinating stuff. So thank you so much for presenting that information.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. Well, reminder that you can submit questions using the Q&A. We'll do a Q&A after all presentations. And up next, I would like to invite Joet Reoma. Joet directs the Project Grow's Compost Education Center with Jesse Radenbosch. He is an MSU Extension Master Gardener, a Washtenaw County Master Composter, a Master Rain Gardener, a Conservation Steward, and Urban Permaculture Consultant. He teaches the Master Composter Certification Program of Washtenaw County, and he coordinates the U of M SEAL class, Engaged Academic Learning Through Community Gardening, in partnership with Project Grow. Joet also dabbles in beekeeping, vermiculture, aquaponics, and deep organic gardening. But outside of gardening, he serves as a local and National Red Cross volunteer and a local member of CERT, which is the Community Energy Response Team. So also very plugged in and another wealth of information here. Joet, welcome to tonight's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Oh, what? Okay, cool. You got it?
You have it?
Getting this. Cool. I will stop sharing that then.
Oh, you're not sharing it.
Nope, I think we're on your screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we see it.
Yeah, let's see. Well, let me try then. So I got to learn this technology as well.
Would you like me to? Yeah, I think you had asked at the beginning that I do it. I'd be happy to do that if you.
Oh, could you?
Sure.
All right.
Certainly.
Very good then.
Yeah.
Let me stop sharing.
Get this back open.
All right.
There we go.
So this is my outline. My topic is about soil health, and the reason for that is because my major work, actually, I work with Lisa Perschke, the one who's just presenting on wetlands. She and I both are faculty at the with the Master Composter Certificate Program of Washtenaw County. She does a lot of bucket composting, which I love, and I do hot or thermophilic composting. So this is my outline today. Let's talk about ecosystem gardening and farming. That's basically what I teach at the Project Grow. Second, how farming and gardening techniques affect soil health. The third one is about compost gardening, and this basically is a technique of gardening or farming that focuses mainly on feeding the soil instead of feeding your plants. And fourth, I'll introduce the Master Composter program of Washtenaw County. Next. So what is an ecosystem approach to farming or gardening? In case this is a quick review of what is an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a network of interactions within the community of living organisms, where the global processes occur in a defined or in a largely self-regulating system. On the left side of this two disc are the biotic or the living resources or living organisms in the ecosystem. Mainly they are producers, consumers, and decomposers. Whereas on the right side of these discs, they are the abiotic or non-living parts of the ecosystem, which represents the climate, sunlight, temperature, nutrients, humidity, soil. And when they interact together, what happened is that the outcome is mainly that the biotic factors, the living things, have to rely on the non-living environment. Next. So there are basic ecosystem processes that are involved during this interaction. And 4 of them are universal, basically. These are decomposition or composting, production. So this will be the production of plant matter, air, or water, nutrient cycling, and energy flows. If you have a working ecosystem, well-functioning ecosystem, always it produces benefits. And these benefits are called ecosystem services. So when you're talking about ecosystems, then it always accompanies ecosystem services. And these services supplied to human societies by healthy natural ecosystems. These are the following. Again, we are generalizing here because every ecosystem has different sets of ecosystem services. So number 1 of the classification of ecosystem services would be the provisioning, such as the production of food or the production of water. Regulating is the second one, such as the control of climate and disease and healing earth. Third one is supporting or supportive ecosystem services, such as nutrient cycles, oxygen production, and so on. And finally, we simply call it cultural. An example would be such as spiritual and recreational benefits. Ecosystems are natural capital. You can consider them as natural capital, and ecosystem services as the dividends generated by well-managed natural capital. And in this fashion, you can say that reciprocity between the interacting elements is the mother of sustainability. Without a good ecosystem, there can be no sustainable ecology. Next. This is just a picture of how the abiotic factors influence on plants, on crop growth. We start, of course, with radiation and temperature that comes from the sun, rain. We are talking about the movement of water. And then from the soil, we have the microbes and the carbon and nitrogen uptake, the nutrient cycle, and so on. Let's go to the next. This is a summary of the interaction between biotic and abiotic factors in an ecosystem. On the left column, these are the list of living organisms that plants need to grow. And of course, now the paradigm shift is that we are nowadays, we focus on the living, the life inside the soil, which are basically fungi, bacteria, soil, food web, the insects there, individual plants, because they form communities and they partner with each other, they communicate with each other. And of course, the omnivores. And the omnivores includes us because we are the ones that eat the plants. On the right side column, these are the non-living factors that plants need to grow. And basically, they are arranged in terms of 5 or 6 basic elements. One is the sunlight, temperature, water, soil health, oxygen, and space to grow. Now, when they interact with the biotic and abiotic groups, there are three processes that are in the interaction process. One is that biotic factors have to rely on abiotic elements in order to survive. It's not the other way around. Two, interactions are managed by us, by the humans. And this is where the mistake of mismanagement comes in. And finally, ecosystem services are the benefits supplied to human societies by healthy natural ecosystems. Next. So, what is soil health? Soil health is the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Now, some of the vital ecosystem services is missing here. One is nutrient cycling, water filtration and moisture retention, filtering and buffering, habitat biodiversity, physical stability and support. These principles of soil health are scalable. They apply to large farms, very large farms, even the entire biosphere, Earth, as well as they actually apply also to your small raised bed garden plot. So next slide. So we can say that soil is really a living factory of organisms, because now we realize that without those organisms, you simply not only destroy the soil, but the plants in the long run, as well as the environment. On the left side of, there are two panels here. On the left side are the list of macroscopic and microscopic organisms. And they represent the food, the water, shelter, habitat, and they are powered by sunlight. On the right side panel represents the management activities that either improve or degrade soil health. And I would like to mention 5 of them. These are actually techniques in farming or techniques in gardening that had been traditionally practiced and are now being replaced by different forms of different techniques of organic gardening. Tillage, second is fertilizer, the use of fertilizer. Much of gardening and farming nowadays, we discourage fertilizers. Pesticides, the use of pesticides, grazing, and plant diversity. And I will talk only about the ones with asterisk, tillage and plant diversity. Next. So what is tillage? This is basically, tillage is basically a physical disturbance and manipulation of the soil for the purpose of the following. 1, management of previous crop residue. In the olden days, we thought that by getting rid of the residue or burying them very quickly in deep burrows is the best way of farming. Second, control of competing vegetation, basically weeds. We still do that today, but in a different way, different manner. 3 is incorporation of amendments, fertilizer and manure. 4th, preparation of soil for planting equipment. And 5, I love the 5th one, recreation for folks who don't fish or golf. Next. So the difference between till and no-till. Till farming is traditionally a system of planting crops by tilling the soil, in fact, deeply, with a plow, disc, chisel, or similar machinery. No-till, on the other hand, is completely the opposite. It's a system of planting crops without tilling the soil using plow, disc, chisel, and other tillage implements. This is what happens. This quote here on the left side bottom is kind of an exaggeration, but actually very dramatic. So let me read it. Tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. Imagine that. Nowadays, when we are talking about paradigm shift in soil health and gardening and farming operations, we are now focusing on a simple idea, and that is compost farming or compost gardening. And basically that's farming or gardening focused solely and mainly on improving soil health. Because if you do that, focus on improving soil health, everything else seems to fall in place. Next. So what does tillage do to the soil? It destroys the aggregates. And aggregates basically are what the microbes put together to prepare the soil for tilth. Exposes organic matter to decomposition, okay. And but we are now discovering that you don't have to expose organic matter outside of the soil, but by burying them a little bit with soil, they actually decompose much quicker. Tilling also compacts the soil. It damages the soil fungi, especially. Remember, fungi has hyphae that are very long, and in some instances, they are so long that when you plow, you basically tore them into pieces. And that's not good. It stops them from communicating with the plants that they help and with each other. It reduces the habitat for the soil food web. Disrupts soil pore continuity. Now, this is very important because this is where hydrology, the movement of water, is disrupted. I shouldn't say disrupted, but speeding up so that it results in erosion. It also increases salinity because once the soil surface is exposed, there are chemical changes together with the rain, and that causes more deposit of sodium on the surface of the soil. And of course, you're planting weeds because you're turning over the soil. So let me summarize very quickly keys to achieving healthy soil. Avoid or minimize heavy disturbance or tilling. Number 2, place a bio armor, a bio shield on the soil surface using plant diversity in crop rotation, cover crop, and green manure. 3, plant diversity to attract more diverse community of microorganisms. And the more extensive will be the ecosystem services that will be provided. 4, keep living roots as long as possible to help mycorrhizae. These are the fungi that have symbiotic relations with roots of plants to help in the nitrogen uptake. Absorption, in other words, of nitrogen nutrients. Keep the soil covered with growing plants along with plant residue at all times, basically to protect the soil microbes and the soil itself from erosion. This would encourage nutrient cycling, and that means basically specific nutrients can transfer from organic matter that are decomposing to the soil, and the soil is where the plants are being hosted. And do compost gardening, and I'll explain more about compost gardening, and the integration of livestock to cropland. Indeed, there is a whole field where the introduction of livestock becomes very crucial in the food web as well as in soil health in the long run. Next one. So the impact of cover crop in commercial farming. So one of the advice nowadays is that even for both large farms and small farms would be to avoid no-till, and no-till gardening or farming is the best way of doing it to keep the soil healthy. Make use of cover crops or live plants is the second step. And indeed, one of the things that we teach in the Master Composter Certificate program is that use cover crops even in your small garden. Farmers can reduce their input cost by planting cover crops. And this has been demonstrated on very large scale farming. How we manage the soil impacts soil temperature, water storage, and crop yields. Again, this has been noted so many times. There are many demonstration projects that what is the culprit in our ecosystem processes is how humans manage the processes of farming and gardening. Soil health also impacts weeds, insects, diseases, weather, and of course, climate. Next. So benefits of cover crops in managing insects, diseases, and weeds. I focus on this because this is one of the important things that ecosystem services that are offered by a good management of using cover crops. By improving soil quality and fertility, cover crops contribute to holistic pest management strategy. You must have heard of the integrated pest management. So part of integrated pest management is to use cover crops. They directly smother or suppress weeds. They break insect and disease cycles. They provide habitat, pollen, and nectar for beneficial insects. They provide animal feed. They provide source of mulch, food for soil microbes. They add to farm aesthetics. They help balance the stress of increased production with the satisfaction of soil building. Next. This is a summary of the ecosystem services of organic cropping systems. And it's very interesting that if you apply this on a very large scale farming, the landscape itself, whether you like it or not, will give you the following ecosystem services. They're almost automatic. One is biological control of pests, pollination, nutrient inputs, moderation of wind, and moisture retention. Now, if you well manage an agricultural practice, these are the ecosystem services that are added. One is water filtration. It builds the soil, your soil. Wildlife habitat is favored, is built. Carbon sequestration, and finally, and very important nowadays, is the greenhouse gas reduction. Next. I mentioned about compost gardening. So compost gardening is basically, very simply, in-plot composting. You compost while you garden on the same area, the same place. So use in-plot trench composting by burying plant waste and earthworm-friendly kitchen scraps in between plant rows. And you can see these in the image below. And the benefits for this. Also, the second step after you bury it is that you apply a waste covering, a mix of leaf molds, which contain a lot of fungi and trench soil. Moisten and bury the organic waste. And the benefits, the eco services of compost gardening are as follows. Again, nutrient production nearby root system. You don't have to hold the compost there because it's just beside the root system. A direct nutrient cycle system where the energy and matter are transferred between living organisms, decomposers, and the soil directly. Encourages beneficial microbes and earthworms. It can ward off fungal and soil-borne diseases and conserves moisture and minimizes watering. You don't have to water. If you practice like this, you don't have to water it every day. Next. Now let me talk about the Washington County's Master Composter Certificate Program, or the MCCP, and Project Grow. So Project Grow is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It was founded in 1972 in Ann Arbor. Since then, it has established an organic gardening organization that manages 20 plus community gardens, 20 plus. In 2012, Washington County's Consortium for Solid Waste awarded Project Grow the privilege of managing the county's Master Composter Certificate Program. It is funded by the Department of Public Works, Washington County. Next. These are examples of our bin system that we use for teaching purposes, and the Campus Education Center, which was established in 2011, is located on the grounds of Leslie Science and Nature Center. Since you'll be giving this handout, I don't have to explain everything about there. Perhaps other than in conclusion, so circular economy favors activities that preserve value in the form of energy, labor, and materials. But this means you must design your entire system, the durability, reuse, remanufacturing, packaging, recycling, and so on, so that they circulate much longer inside the economy. Now, how to transform food and garden waste to healthy soil? This is basically where we're talking about the circular economy of soil health. One, adopt an ecosystem approach to farming and gardening, because your work would be much, much easier, less effort, less investments, and so on. Number two, become a master composter of the county. The tuition there is only $50 or $59. And number three, establish a backyard compost garden. And if you don't have access to a backyard, join the community or neighborhood, either community gardening like Project Grow, or a compost education center where you can bring in your kitchen waste. And finally, the fifth one, and this is the practice that we do now here in Washington County, divert kitchen waste to your backyard garden or to a CEC, or Campus Education Center. I think I'm done. Next. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I am pretty close to setting my keyboard on fire over here because I'm furiously taking notes. And I have am compiling so many questions regarding composting and tilling and gardening. So between you and Lisa, I'm impressed that my keyboard is not yet on fire. And boy, we'll see what comes of David's presentation here, just adding to it. So thank you so much, Joet. Okay, and so on to our final presentation of the night. I would like to introduce David Benjamin, who is yet another very well qualified individual to be here. I'm pretty honored to have all three of you here representing for us. David is a National Charette Institute certified, a Master of Nonprofit Administration and Leadership, a lead associate planner. He's a member of the European Association of Archaeologists. So definitely, again, very well qualified. He's a design architect, consultant on buildings and built central heritage conservation, and a built environmental researcher focused on sustainable cultural landscapes and overall sustainable innovation for the construction industry. He's a partner at Todd Ecological Design and an advisor on the use and design of ecological machines for ecosystem restoration and waste treatment work, and the education of students of and about ecological machines. So Dr. Benjamin's doctorate work is a study of ecology, cultural landscapes, and architecture in prehistoric Scandinavia. His postdoctoral research and teaching work at Oslo Met University during 2010 on the construction industry's sustainable innovation with 5 external clients. He's an author of books and papers with research on the built environment and urban food, energy, waste, water nexus innovations, along with consulting on building design, historic conservation, sustainability analysis, design interventions, and policy proposal. So welcome, Dr. Benjamin, as a co-owner of the water sustainability firms Aqua Naturae in Norway and the Todd Ecological Design. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Let me get my screen shared for you. We can get into your presentation here as well. You would think that we would be pros at this after 2 years of virtual. Okay, I think there we go.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I've been asked to talk about EcoMachines, which is not just a buzzword that somebody invented, but it is a type of constructed ecology that can be constructed in different ways that mimics the behavior and functions of the types of ecosystems that Joet, Reoma, and Lisa Perschke talked about, wetlands and gardens, in such a way that EcoMachines, for example, produce soils or fertilizers or useful plants. They can process waste, organic waste, and turn that organic waste into something useful, like soils that can be used for planting, or they can make compost teas that can be used to fertilize soil. So next slide. So EcoMachines, in that sense that they process a natural resource like organic waste and turn it into something else, they do work, which in this case is biochemical work on a natural resource and transform it into something else that a natural system and or human society finds useful, such as a fertilizer, an organic fertilizer that can be used to grow more food or other products of use to society. They exist at different scales, both at the microcosm scale, such as in a small aquarium-sized tank that can fit on a laboratory or kitchen bench, and they can be up to the mesocosm scale, which is an enclosed outdoor experimental context, which is constructed that bridges the gap between the laboratory and the real world in environmental science in order to model how ecosystems work or to provide ecological work, such as making fertilizer or soil or compost teas, for example, from waste products like residue from falling leaves or waste food. Next slide. So an early example from the 1800s of the kind of functions that an eco-machine produces are the Winogradsky column, which was invented in the 1880s by Sergei Winogradsky, where he basically took soil from the environment and put water in it and things like newspaper for the cellulose, which is basically a sugar, and blackened marshmallows and eggshells. And he was able to culture living microbes inside of it. And Winogradsky columns are used to culture these kind of microbiotic life for experimental purposes. Eco-machines are a next generation of a Winogradsky column that exists in 3 spatial dimensions and time, and they're larger, and they enclose a much larger diversity of species and different kinds of abiotic life. So next slide. So one of the important ways that eco-machines are designed and built is that they mimic natural systems. So in designing an eco-machine, whether that's a constructed wetland to process sewage, or it's a in-building tank system that can look like a normal aquarium with glass walls, but encloses in a constructed ecology, in order to design them, the designers mimic natural systems. So in the photograph, you see many different components of a natural system, such as soil, leaf residue, a snail, insects. In short, eco-machines ideally enclose all 6 kingdoms of life and other abiotic components, such as rock, gravel, soils, air, water, and other components to build a constructed ecology that in its functions and the structural relationships between the components, they mimic the work of an ecosystem, but in an enclosed environment for the purposes of either performing experiments or performing useful work, such as just digesting waste and turning it into a safe, hygienic product, such as a fertilizer. Next slide. So these eco-machines, they exist within 2 categories of what scientists use to study these kinds of living systems that are used experimentally or used by engineers to perform work. One of those ways of modeling the system is the quintuple helices of the social natural structure of living systems. The quintuple helices is the helices of and the relationship between the political system, the general public, academia, the research systems, and the natural systems. All of these systems in our society work together to produce and reproduce useful work and living systems that society uses. Besides the quintuple helices, EcoMachines also are modeled within a nexus that's called the food, energy, water, waste, and societal culture system. All of these different components of society interact with each other to produce useful work, such as the processing of waste, for example, into something that is safe and hygienic, either for disposal or for recycling in the use of farms. For example, a conventional example of a process within the food, energy, water, waste societal culture system is how municipal sewage treatment plants use monoculture bacteria in tanks to process sewage into a waste product that is then, for example, spread onto farmland for growth, which I personally don't believe is the best use of that processed sewage. And EcoMachines process the same sewage source into a much higher grade type of soil as fertilizer that can be used in a much safer way on the same farm to grow higher grade foods and other products, such as, for example, plants for herbal medicines. So in the way that we build EcoMachines, they are can be built to perform various functions. Most popular ones are for water purification, sewage treatment of municipal sewage, habitat restoration, such as, for example, on the shores of the Great Lakes, where there are degraded habitats because of the emission of high nutrient pollution from farms and industrial plants. They can be built to monitor ecosystem health, recycle essential nutrients and minerals, and they can produce valuable nutrients and fertilize the production of food. Next slide. So this is a graphic image of the food, energy, water, the food, energy, water system. To this, several authors and scientists are adding water and waste and culture and society to this system. And although it seems complicated, all of these components of how society functions are necessary to include in a model in order to be able to model how societal systems actually work. So it's important not to simplify how society works, but to add components that really exist. Next slide. So if these systems, EcoMachines model and actually perform work in keeping with the original meaning from the Greek of economy. The word, our word economy, comes from the Greek oikonomia, which actually means the management of the natural resource flows of the kitchen. I have that from a Greek native speaker, what oikonomia actually means. And the root of oikonomia, which leads to our word economy, is also the root for ecology. So ecology and economy actually have a lot to do with each other, even though in our day, most people understand the connotation of the word economy to mean making money. But actually what it means is the management of resources in order to produce that which is valuable to society and nature, and which goes beyond just money. So eco-machines, as I said before, can be constructed at various different scales. So for example, they can have benefit by being constructed at the lab bench scale, which can be used educationally, or they can be constructed at a much larger scale, such as a constructed wetland, which can process different kinds of wastes. And I'll show you an illustration of that kind of a system, a very large constructed wetland, which processes food waste. Next slide. So this is an image of what the quintuple helices look like as a graphic model. The political system, the culture system, the educational academic system, the business economic system, and the natural environment, how they all work together. And so I won't dwell on this, but you can study this at your leisure after my talk. Next slide. So this helices model is important to help us understand how machines like EcoMachines fit into what is important for society to achieve if society wants to build a sustainable, functioning nature human system. The natural environment of society and the economy also should be seen as drivers for knowledge production and innovation, and which therefore defines opportunities for the knowledge economy. And so therefore, the types of machines that eco-machines are also an opportunity for entrepreneurs to build a whole new class of machinery that is needed by a society that is constrained by lack of resources of phosphorus and sulfur, and which needs to perform work such as growing food with a very low input of carbon and energy. Eco-machines can do this, and therefore eco-machines are a very important opportunity for investment, production of intellectual property, and producing new types of machines that can produce new types and whole new classes of employment for people in a new climate-constrained economy in the world. Next slide. So eco-machines are based on modeling the components and functions of nature. So on the left side, you see the Bahama Islands from the International Space Station, which is a complex kind of saltwater-based ocean ecosystem that is often modeled when producing an eco-machine for a saltwater environment. On the right-hand side, you see the Chattanooga Creek in Tennessee, near Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's a creek that was insulted by a nearby coal plant that produced coal for steel production. And there was about 30 different complex chemicals and heavy metals that polluted this creek over 30 to 40 years. And John Todd Ecological Design produced an in-stream, in-flow floating island that was an eco-machine that restored the water quality of this stream. After about 5 years of this floating island in the Chattanooga Creek, the EPA declared the water quality as returned to normal. most of the chemicals that were from the plant were below the level of detection, and several species of fish and other invertebrate life and waterfowl returned to the creek, and the EPA removed our EcoMachine because it was no longer necessary, and now the creek is free flowing and declared safe for use by humans. Next slide. So this is another example of a comparison of conventional to non-conventional ecological machines and how they work. On the left-hand side, you see a swine waste lagoon in Georgia, which uses conventional flocculation and chemicals to process swine waste. And you see these plastic pipes coming from the swine waste production facility going into this lagoon. And the levels of nitrogen and ammonia and other complex chemicals and biotoxins that are in this lagoon are at a very high level of biological oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand. On the right-hand side, you see a large constructed wetland, which has a flow of about 8.5 million liters per day, and it treats high biological oxygen demand chicken waste from Tyson chicken. And the original reason why this plant was built was because Tyson chicken, before the EcoMachine constructed wetland was built, Tyson chicken was cited by the EPA because it was dumping their chicken waste basically untreated into the Chesapeake estuary. And they were in non-compliance, and the EPA threatened to shut down the plant if they didn't do something about the waste they were putting in the Chesapeake estuary. So John Todd Ecological Design was asked to design a nature-based solution, constructed wetland, to clean up the waste, which was successful. This constructed wetland of about 8.5 million liters per day. I think it's about 34 million liters of hydraulic capacity. It uses about 5 to 10 horsepower to process this for the oxygenation of the plants. And the way it works is that those rows of plants that you see floating in these floating merits in the water, those plants are a specially chosen series of species of plant that like to exist in water, and their roots go down into the water, and their roots are inoculated with specific series of species of bacteria and mycorrhizae, and they transfer oxygen and other gases to the plant root and other nutrients. And the bacteria and the plants process the waste and pick up some of these chemicals. They mineralize the chemicals so that by the time the process is completed, these chemicals are mineralized to about a degree of about 95%. And the water is more than clean enough to be deposited into the Chesapeake estuary. Next slide.
Great. And David, we'll do about a 3-minute heads up here, if that's all right.
Oh, okay. All right. So these are some references that you can look at about why constructed wetlands and EcoMachines work. These are literature reviews that you see on the right-hand side. Next slide. You went backwards, I think. Next slide. Yeah. So this is a comparison of how EcoMachines are designed in contrast to conventional systems. On the right-hand side, you see that EcoMachines are designed based on the cellular model of how cells work, but blown up to a larger scale, where a tank is a kind of a cell, and within each one of these water tanks, there are hanging curtains that function at a cellular level, and within the hanging curtain down into the water column, there are cells at each level, at each cellular level, recycling and processing of waste is going on, and other species are eating those waste in a complete circular pathway from food to waste to food, and in catabolic to anabolic processes. Next slide. So how ecological machines are designed is based on the 4 orders of ecological design, which John, Todd, and I have written about in a paper that was presented at the Smart and Sustainable Built Environments Conference in 2009 in Delft, the Netherlands. You can read this slide later. Next slide. So this is some of the performance data from that Chattanooga Creek restoration work, where we installed that floating merd inside the Chattanooga Creek, and we reduced most of the complex chemicals by over 90%, all of them by at least 70%. So next slide. So this is a slide talking about the benefits of EcoMachines and ecological engineering that's used to design EcoMachines and their benefits. Next slide. So this is a slide that talks about why EcoMachines are an interesting type of machine for tech entrepreneurs and engineers to be interested in designing new EcoMachines for use by human society, and are therefore an interesting object of investment and developing intellectual property, and certainly interesting for the entrepreneurial environment here in Southeast Michigan. Next slide. So these are some references for ecological design and engineering and EcoMachines that you can refer to later after my speech. And here, next slide. And this is just a encouragement to the entrepreneurial environment here in Southeast Michigan. It's funding for building these kind of new machines is available from the USDA, USDI, NSF, private foundations, and certainly are an interesting opportunity to invest in for entrepreneurs who want to build new environmentally safe environmental machinery for the climate constrained world. And there's my contact information. Okay, and I'm finished. That's it.
Okay, great. Didn't want to rush you there. There's so much information. And I think it's really valuable that you have put so much work into developing these EcoMachines, because the benefit that these provide to all of us is I think invaluable. So I think it's really great that there are opportunities for people to get involved with that. I do want to open the floor for some Q&A and transition into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'd like to invite all of our panelists back. If you are an attendee, you are more than welcome to submit questions using the Q&A. You can just type it in. If you would like to ask your question, you can raise your hand. And hopefully I'll see it, and I can even give you permission to speak if that's your preference. So let's see here. Oh, I'm still sharing. Left that up for your contact info, but I'll gladly share that around as well with the attendees. So one of the questions that has been submitted is in regards to geothermal systems. And some of those require that the land that they are installed on have a water source for the runoff to be deposited. And how does this impact the soil and the water of the local area? That question came in during Dr. Benjamin's presentation, but I think we'll open to anyone who would like to answer that.
Well, I have one comment on that.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, well, I think that before installing a geothermal system for heating and cooling at a house or a commercial facility, that one would want to contact a geotech engineer to do a hydrological study of the landscape to make sure that if you're drawing off that water and using it, you don't drastically change the hydrogeology of your site, which can cause many problems, both for the building and for the ecology of the landscape.
Right. And I don't know to what extent you could speak more to that, but I know that there are vertical and horizontal systems. I imagine that you're referring more to the horizontal that take up a large footprint, correct?
Yeah, well, even with the vertical systems, they draw off a lot of water, and it's the volume and the flow rate of the water that can be of concern, because if you draw off a lot of water, you can produce subsidence of the building. All right, and you're also drawing off water that is otherwise has been previously used by ecosystems at the landscape. And so it's just important to have an engineer study that, so you go into it with eyes wide open and you know what you're doing before you spend $100,000 on a system.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. Let's see, Joet, during your presentation, you were talking a bit about tilling and the impacts that has on the decomposition of the materials that are in the soils. How does tilling come into the equation when you're talking about compost in a situation where you want there to be decomposition of materials?
I suppose, am I on?
Yep.
I suppose that the residue for decomposition comes from cover crops, right? So the new technology nowadays is that you would plant cover crops with a specific timing, so that you basically harvest or kill the cover crop by passing a roller across them, the crimp. And if you do this right before the seed, you actually kill off the plant without possibility of weeds coming from the seeds that it would have born. So by doing it that way, you actually create a blanket on the surface of the soil. And by creating a blanket there, you increase the activity of the microorganisms that feed on the residue. That's one. And then it has other ecosystem services, and that is suppressing weeds and so on. And you can then use, if you are in a very large farm, you can then use seeding machine that actually doesn't plow but drill. Tiny little drills for the plants to go in, either planting seedlings in tiny little seedling pods, or planting directly with seeds. And then there's a tiny little gizmo that follows after the drill and planting that actually covers the hole, or compacts it a little bit. Now, we're talking about composting, right?
Right.
Now, when you are in a scenario like that, the only source of your compost basically are the cover crops, and that's why you call them green manure. And if you have planted enough, and there's a recommendation of how much seed to be planted to make it into convert it into a green manure, then the whole purpose of the combined ecosystem services that are provided by this type of farming is far more than if you add whole in finished compost. There is absolutely no need anymore of hauling in compost, unless of course you have an abundance of cow manure, horse manure, and things like that, or chicken manure. Lisa, am I answering it right, Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I actually have been using winter rye on my garden soil for the last 2 years, and I noticed that about July, it just naturally died back. And I purposely told my husband, do not please rototill my garden soil, please leave it alone. And he's been weed whacking it, making it short. So when I do plant, it's actually, like you said, gets down and crumps it, and it's actually holding the soil, because our base is very sandy here in Brighton Township. And that actually adds to, you know, keeping the soil in place. Otherwise it'd be shifting, and you don't want that.
Well, similarly, on the note of compost, we've got a question that came in that for those of us that are not able to compost outside where we live, do you have any recommendations for a small kitchen, like an appliance-sized composter?
I don't think you really need a composter. You can use red wigglers, red wiggling worms. Also, you could utilize a 5-gallon bucket, or lots of 5-gallon buckets. Or as I piloted for Ann Arbor back in, I think it was 2014, just a 26 or a 66-gallon bucket. It was a Rubbermaid with a snap-on lid, and you just prepare it. You run over your garden leaves out in the yard with a mulching lawnmower with a bag on it, stick them in the actual garbage can or your compost bin when you can't use it in the wintertime. Take a bunch of soil, you know, from the surface somewhere in your yard and put it in a 5-gallon bucket. And as you go through your vegetables and fruits, I actually took whole watermelon rinds and cantaloupe rinds and threw it into this thing where I prepared it and put soil and water and mixed it till it was like a wet sponge, and added this material all winter long. And when I went to go turn it onto my bagged leaves that were covered for winter in the spring, it was completely mature. I was astounded. It had heated up in my garage over winter, and that's all you need. You don't need an actual these new inventions. Like I said, we think we advance as we move through, but if we just create the systems like Dr. Benjamin was talking about, it's just like ecology. You know, you have an ecosystem there, and it's actually taking the greens, the browns, the microbes in the soil, and some water so they can move around in there, those microbes, and they just do their thing. It's natural. So no thing that I can recommend.
Oh, okay. It looks like a clarification came in that the small compost question is more for an apartment balcony garden. So yard waste isn't often part of the equation in that case. But the red wigglers you can have in your home, even just for your kitchen scraps. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Just make sure that you don't put too much watery material there because it would leach. And then you do need to make sure that you maintain the ecosystem of that vermiculture. So you're doing basically vermicomposting. And vermicomposting can actually work very well as long as you understand the ecosystem that you are making there. And there are many ways of hiding your vermicompost if you don't have a garage. If you're living in an apartment, put it near a vent so that it increases dehydration, not outside the patio because you would kill the earthworms.
Actually, they're reg wigglers. Don't call them earthworms, because then they'll go out and dig in the garden, and you don't want that, because those guys like to go real deep. Right? Right, Joet? Yeah.
Joet and Lisa, are there resources that people can access in Washtenaw County or the MSUE Extension Service about this?
Washtenaw County has a website, a master composting website. I don't know if the city does anymore. You can answer that, Zach, but there's a lot of resources there.
Yes, there's actually. The other thing too is that
I can't hear you, Joet.
the other thing too is that you can combine your your kitchen waste by putting it in. Usually apartments have their own single stream composting bins that you can there. And one way of doing that so that it's not so messy is to freeze your kitchen waste. You chop it up really small and then remove the sauce, the juice. If you have plants in there, you can repurpose the juice, the leach, basically, either by cooking. What I do usually, Lisa, is at home is that I cook the juice that, well, I'm Asian, so I eat a lot of fish. I eat a lot of stinky material. And so to minimize the smell, I actually make soup out of them and use the soup for watering my indoor plants. And the hard stuff, you put it in a compostable plastic bag and have it frozen so you can throw it outside. But I have my own yard where I have a compost digester. So
yeah, there are a lot of resources at the county website, Washtenaw County.
yes,
that I probably more so than at the city, and I am sorry, but I don't know about what the city's resources are. Believe it or not, I should. I do know that expanding composting, the composting program in terms of curbside collection is a named action in the 820 plan. So it is something that the Office of Sustainability is actively working towards. But in terms of backyard composting, I think probably the Washtenaw County website is one of the best resources. And speaking of, oh yeah, go ahead, Joet.
I'm the director of Compost Education Center based at Leslie, right? And at Leslie, we have 3 bins that we use for hot composting. Hot meaning we combine the certain ratio, 2 parts brown and 1 part green, so that the thermophilic bacteria gets crazy and eat up and heats it up to about 140, 160 degrees. Once in a while, we find that there are people that would actually go there and sneak in a plastic bag full of kitchen waste. And of course, if you do it that way, it becomes very smelly. It becomes anaerobic situation and becomes very smelly. I guess I'm very short of saying that find a compost education center close to you, ask permission to bring in your compost, and follow the rules of putting it there. Because in our case, at Project Grow, we do accept neighborhood compostables, kitchen waste, not compostables, kitchen waste. It has to be very specific, kitchen waste.
So, Joet, you just used a word there, anaerobic. And so when we're talking about composting, we hear aerobic and anaerobic, biotic and abiotic, and even in David's presentation, we heard catabolic and anabolic. I'm wondering if somebody might be able to dive into a brief overview of the differences between these words and where they might be used.
Defer to Lisa.
Oh, I was thinking Dr. Benjamin. He has the doctorate, but can you go ahead? No?
I have a PhD in architecture. That means I don't know really anything.
Okay.
Okay.
When you talked about, what was the first two you said?
Aerobic and anaerobic.
Okay. Anaerobic is the one that we don't want it to go to unless you want to ferment. Fermentation is totally a different cycle. It's absence of oxygen. And that is beneficial to our gut because of the different kind of microbes that are present. And we want a diverse array of microbes. But when you have it in your compost, like Joet was saying in the hot compost, it's kind of like having a fresh, you ever smell fresh earthy smelling soil versus a toilet, maybe like an outhouse that really stinks. That's the difference. That's becoming anaerobic. When you have oxygen present, things become aerobic. And so that has a different set of microorganisms that exist, and they're less likely to be diseased because of that presence of oxygen. I was doing some reading when I wrote a compost article for the waste book that I wrote last year, and they were talking about when things go anaerobic, you're more likely to get things that cause disease than if you just stay with the aerobic, oxygen-sided microbes.
Aerobic basically means with air.
Mhm.
And if there is circulation of air, it doesn't smell. The composition doesn't smell. And there are many ways of making a smelly situation aerobic, and that is adding their wood chips. Indeed, for those of you listening, the DTE house at Leslie Science and Nature Center, they have waterless toilets. And if you go downstairs or even in the toilet itself, you would not be able to smell the poop smell or urine because the composter system is so good that, and it uses only wood chips down in the basement. You can see it. So it's very possible then that those chemical-based, watery, portable toilets that are usually put in what is this, places in the park and so on, they can be replaced with a new EcoMachine that is based, an EcoMachine, a constructed EcoMachine toilet system that is primarily based on wood chips.
That's great. Yeah, and one way is, I hear a lot of discussion about turning your compost if you do have a compost pile, say in your backyard or something, and that I'm presuming is to oxygenate the compost that's there, correct? Yeah. Let's see, we were talking about at-home composting in the kitchen. You had briefly touched, David, on some of the different scales of EcoMachines, and I just was clarifying whether or not that was something that you could have in your home. One of your slides mentioned the kitchen table or at a desktop scale. Is that something that an EcoMachine that you could bring into your home, or was that more of a presentation of the different sizes of EcoMachines?
Yeah, actually, there are machines that have been built. A couple examples of a machine that's about the size of a very large aquarium, with glass walls that we built for the Green Build Conference in 2011 that processes food scraps in 24 to 32 hours, and it makes a kind of a humus-like soil at the end of the process from that. And it uses a very little bit of water, gravel, soil, and plants, microbes, mosses, some snails, and various other forms of invertebrate life, and it makes soil. And those kinds of systems are described in actually a short book that John Todd, who is the professor at the University of Vermont of biology, that I refer to it in that as the leader of that firm, John Todd Ecological Design, and he wrote it together with 4 students at the university. And it's a book that describes in great detail the physical components of how you put together that kind of a kitchen table eco-machine. And you can actually build one at home, you know, if your mother says it's okay, for $50 to $200. They're cheap to build. You get 99% of the components for these machines from an aquarium store. And the other components are water, and you can also buy some specialized bacteria inoculate from different bacteria producers. Like there's a guy in Montreal, Canada, who makes some of the best bacteria. All of those things are described in this book. And my plan, together with Joet Reoma and perhaps Lisa, if she's interested, maybe, our plan is to produce a revised version of this book and put it out there for use by schools and homeschoolers to teach people both how to build eco-machines and to give them an infrastructure that they can use to learn about science in the next generation science standards and the North American environmental education standard system, which is used, the NAES standard is used by the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And so that machine could be used as in a physical infrastructure to teach science and sustainability. And we plan to put out a new version of that book this year.
Fantastic. That'll be a really great resource. Yeah, go ahead, Joet.
I just want to add something else. And Lisa and I have covered this in our Master Composter Certificate Program classes. And that is, ever heard of Bokashi composting?
I am not familiar with that.
You haven't?
No.
Probably some of the attendees probably must have heard about this. Bokashi is a Japanese way, is a Japanese term actually, and it refers to pickling your compost, making a pickle out of it, and that is by adding the main addition are the effective organisms that are lactic in nature. One of
Can
those.
you explain that? Can you explain that to the uninitiated?
So what it is that you can actually buy a pouch of bacteria that goes with bokashi. It's a Bokashi. Okay, and as you know, many of the Asian people, they do a lot of pickling, and you can exactly do the same for your kitchen waste, because the whole purpose of pickling is to preserve it. Not really preserve, but to minimize the smell, but at the same time decomposes the material. So in the past, I used to do bokashi composting for the really smelly food stuff like fish bones.
Mm.
Okay, and then the other way too is that as soon as, well, probably because I'm lazy and I don't want to bring my smelly stuff, kitchen waste, directly to the yard to have strange visitors at night fighting over it. So what I do is that I do bokashi and then freeze it and then bring it outside and cover it.
Interesting.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really new to me. Bokashi composting.
Yeah,
I'm
bokashi
gonna have to look into
composting.
that.
You can do internet search on it and you'll find a lot of ways of doing it.
Yeah, it should be mentioned that the Japanese and most of Asia are have for thousands of years practiced composting in many different forms with many different sources. There's a book called The One Straw Revolution by a famous Japanese farmer. I see Lisa knows. I can't remember the guy's name. Can you remember the guy's name, Lisa?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You can just search for it. He's excellent. I wish I wanted to be his disciple, but then I found out he had passed like what 10 years earlier. So
Well, he's got students that still teach.
does he? Awesome.
Yeah. So the book is called The One Straw Revolution, and it has produced many different good imitators around the world of people who went to Japan to learn from him. And his basic idea, as far as I understand it, is that he uses no-till farming, and he uses straw and other plant residue to help in enabling the cultivation of plants. And he uses also animal waste to help in cultivation. There's a lot that can be learned from the Asians in this. So I think there's a great, there's opportunities, I think, for doing really innovative new courses on gardening and waste recycling in Washtenaw County. There are methods that have not yet been used that can produce new courses and new things that Lisa and Joet can teach about in the years to come. More work for you guys.
The never ending. I recognize that we are at time. I think I would love to continue this conversation, and perhaps we can. There's one question here that I want to make sure if we can get an answer to it. In earnest, someone has asked where they can take their composting. They're an Ann Arbor resident. They live in an apartment, and they take their compost right now to an Ann Arbor compost center. But where else can they drop off their compost? Because the compost center isn't open on the weekends all the time. And so it can be tricky to get there. So where's another place where residents can take their compost?
Joet, you know? Now, when they say the compost center, are they talking about an Ann Arbor facility, the one on Packard and Platt?
I presume so. They said that.
I think so.
Okay.
You can definitely drop it off there, but you have to pay a $3 entrance fee.
Do you? Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. If you are a resident and you have very little compost, you can actually just go in there free.
That's what I thought. And I don't
What
know why
about the Leslie Center?
Oh, yeah.
To the Leslie Center, sure, yeah.
We have a very huge vermiculture composter. It's a huge bin, accommodates about 80,000 red regulars, 8 by 10 feet. I kind of hesitate. Well, give me a call and then we'll negotiate about how you're going to put it there, because we do need food for our red regulars. In the olden days, I used to go to a local school and a nearby coffee shop to get the compost for the earthworms. So give my phone number. My number is 734-972-8875.
Repeat that one more time.
I was purposely saying it very quickly. No, 734-972-8875.
There you go. They should have got it by now.
Okay. And by the way, some of the developments that we are tackling right now with a new organization that David and I have joined called SEND, SEND, is to create a composting center for cluster of neighbors. And the suggestion that I'm toying with the idea of actually a composting that is a biodigester. It's just a container that is half buried in the ground, so that every time you put food waste there, you cover it with a waste cover, wood chips again. Wood chips is very powerful as long as it is dried up, at least a 1-year-old aged wood chips. And in Ann Arbor, there are several places now that you can actually pick up free wood chips.
That's true.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that those wood chips should not come from construction lumber, because construction lumber has arsenic in it and anti-insect chemicals. So the wood chips should come from natural wood, not construction lumber.
Yeah, that's really key.
The wood chips that we use for gardening purposes are certified to be wood forest type of wood chips. Yeah, it's the city that actually distributes it. So.
Zach, I wonder, can you tell us how many people were in the audience?
There are still this says 15 or 16, and I think it was around 20 plus tonight, but we find that a lot of these gain way more views after they've been posted on the sustainability YouTube channel. So that's where a lot of people see it. Sometimes Wednesday night is not ideal, but a lot of people do tune in to the recordings. So I think this will reach a lot of folks.
What's the name of the YouTube channel?
If you search CTN, community television, it's the City of Ann Arbor's website television program, and they have a YouTube website where all city stuff is hosted. And if you search CTN sustainability, I'm sure you'll find it. There is a link to the sustainability YouTube channel on the city's website. And in fact, speaking of the city's website, I am going to do a quick 20-second plug here for the city's sustainability website. We have been drafting a green rental housing program that seeks to standardize expectations for the health, safety, comfort, and energy efficiency of rentals in Ann Arbor. There is a live survey that is available right now at this link on your screen. Everybody in the city of Ann Arbor and beyond are welcome to take this. We want to get as much feedback from as many residents as possible about this proposed policy. And so if you have the time, we encourage everyone to to review the materials that are at the site. So you can see a summary of the policy and take the survey there. There's also a recording of the presentation. Then once you're at the sustainability website, which is a2gov.org/sustainability, at that point you can find the newsletter and events page, which is where you will find a link to the YouTube channel. And so we do encourage you to visit that. You can find more on these upcoming sustainability series events, which again, I mentioned at the beginning of tonight, but I will mention again, a reminder that next month we are focusing on air quality monitoring and why it matters here in Ann Arbor. And that again will be on the last Wednesday of April at 6 p.m. So feel free to join us there. Folks, this has been an engaging conversation. We've gone over a little bit. I know that I have more questions for each of you, and I just want to respect your night and let you get back to your Wednesdays. If you have time, I would love to hear more about some of these books. For instance, Lisa, that you had mentioned, The Hidden Life of Trees, and that got me thinking about all these other books I've read, like The Secret Life of Plants and Braiding Sweet Grass, and all of these things that really talk about that intelligent and complex life of fungi. But I think at this point, I do want to give the opportunity for folks to sign off if they would like to. Thank you so much for hanging out as long as we have.
Zach, I have a suggestion for you, Zach.
Sure, please.
Send out a poll to your audience and ask them if they want to have an